Hello world. The reason I came to the Philippines was to see what everyday life was like. I had 11 days to do this, and after all my scheduling was done, I found myself with a few days extra at the end of the trip. What to do with that free time? Why not some of the things that people travel from all over the world to experience in the Philippines? My basic criteria was some place that was easy to get to from Manila and wouldn't take too much travel time. I only had 3 days, so unfortunately no long journeys for me. I ended up picking El Nido because even though I didn't want to go to well-known tourist spots, in comparison to Metro Manila, it felt a lot more chill, and with the boat tours, I'd be able to get out and enjoy the water. The normal backpacker journey would probably take a flight to Puerto Princesa and then spend anywhere from 5 to 9 hours on the van or bus trip up there. I didn't have that kind of time, so I booked a direct flight with Air Swift. The tickets, costing 13,518 PHP, was a bit more than what a minimum wage worker would make in Metro Manila in a month. In USD, this is like $250, so nothing extravagant. I got lucky with my flight because this is what happened to the flight scheduled right before me.
Counter 8. You have to go to counter 8.
Well, I didn't record any good audio, but basically the flight got cancelled and people were none too happy. While my flight was delayed for about an hour or so, at least I got to board the plane. The one nice thing about going to a smaller place like El Nido was that I felt safe to walk around freely, without a guide, with all my camera gear. On my first day, I rented a scooter for 500 pesos, no paperwork needed, and cruised around. When I got to Nido Beach, I threw my drone up in the air and captured some of the lovely scenery before some clouds rolled in. Many Filipinos asked me if I was bringing my family, and sadly no, I didn't because I was planning on interviewing people around Manila most of the time. But if I could have taken them to this area, I know the kids would have loved the beach over here. It's a gorgeous place. Even though I had heard a lot about this beach, it wasn't really crowded at all. While there are some commercial establishments here, you can tell it still hasn't been overly developed yet. The other side of the beach seemed like a working village. And if I flew my drone in just a little bit, you can see that these aren't resort properties, but where everyday people live. So the main strip of El Nido is where in fact I avoided staying. I chose to stay at a bed and breakfast place about 10 minutes away from the center. The noise over here was mainly nature, which I was totally fine with. The local government has recently made moves to rehabilitate the beachfront, which includes an enforced 3-meter beachfront easement. Essentially, anything within 3 meters of the beach needed to be removed. While good in theory, the implementation went ahead without plans for things like roads. So the road to the area where I was staying was removed, and people had to drive along the beach. So technically, they rehabilitated it. But, I don't think vehicles driving along the beach was what they had in mind. I do believe they'll fix this eventually, and maybe they have already now. I didn't know this at the time, but this seemingly picturesque beachfront, full of tour boats, was at one point polluted with too much raw sewage. High fecal counts meant swimming was not allowed. The government has been putting measures into place to manage this, which is great to hear. I read that they are actually considering doing more to turn this into an even nicer beachfront. The center of town is the most touristy place. I stopped by here to eat some meals, but otherwise avoided it. If you're a partier, I suppose you'd have a good time. For me, I preferred it 1.5 kilometers down the road at Krong Beach. This was way more developed than Nido Beach, but not so busy with boats like El Nido that you couldn't use the beach for beach things like laying around or swimming. It could have been the time of year I went, but it honestly wasn't that busy. There were open spaces at restaurants and cafes, and even some speedy Wi-Fi that I could tap into to finally talk to my family. The best part was the sunset, which was more gorgeous than what I can show you on camera. While I've read that El Nido is no longer the backpacker's paradise it used to be, to me it was not so overly developed that I felt there were too many people. Although, I saw some developments leading up to the beach, so it's changing. The real time that I could say, yeah, it would be nice to be more secluded in El Nido was the boat tours. The regular group boat tours brought you to what makes El Nido famous, the island hopping. The scenery was stunning. But I can totally understand how people who are able to experience this in a small group would have a different vibe than having over 100 people in the same area. I'm told that you can go on private tours that can take you at different times so that you can get to places when they're less crowded. If you have the money, I'd recommend doing that. In truth, all the scenery was so gorgeous that I don't think it would have mattered where they took me. so I would have preferred going to less popular spots. With my last day, I splurged and went scuba diving for the first time. I'm so glad I did. This boat was not only nice and had a toilet, but it went to spots that were less busy. I was an absolute beginner to diving, and they literally threw me into the deep end. I was quite surprised, since I was expecting I would have to take some swimming pool training or do something on a shallow beach, but nope, I was dropped down into the ocean. Admittedly, it wasn't too far from shore or the boat, and I think it was only 5 meters down or so at the start. Before being dropped in, my only training was what my instructor shouted at me as we were cruising along at full speed on the way to the diving spot. When I asked him to repeat his instructions, he was a bit stern, but confident, saying to pay attention when you're underwater and don't worry, he'll show me what to do. He wasn't wrong. When he dropped me down, we had to do all our communication visually. I screwed up a bunch of times, but eventually I got it. While I think my wife would have freaked out in this kind of situation, I would totally do it again this way. What was also good was that since I was a total newbie, all my scuba diving was one-on-one with my experienced guide, so I felt quite safe. I would like to return again to El Nido, but next time with my family. The B&B I stayed at was so hospitable, as was the scuba diving crew. If I could afford it, I'd maybe try some of the more exclusive tours, like multi-day island hopping and camping, or the ones where you get a more secluded beachfront with a limited number of guests. Before I go, I thought it would be fun to talk about the difference between being a tourist and a local. The fact is that, unless you know what locals pay and negotiate, you can pay a lot more money. Like a ride that would cost a local 10 pesos can be 100 for the tourist. And if you're getting off a flight from the nice airport, there's no way to avoid jacked up fees for transportation on the trikes. If I didn't have all my gear, I totally would have walked the 5 kilometers or 3 miles. In Metro Manila, I encountered this foreigner pricing as well. For example, one day I was going to meet a local to do a pedicab tour around Intramuros, a historical city area. Unfortunately, my friend couldn't make it, so when a driver approached me with the official pricing, which is 350p per half hour, I was a bit confused because I told him that my local friend said it would be 150p. And what you know? He flipped it around and it was 150p just for me, the local pricing. I obviously rode like a local. Now looking back at the footage, and wait a sec while I hack this and enhance the image. There we go, there's another set of pricing right on the front of the pedicab. 200 for foreigners, 150 for locals, and as low as 50 for a student. While I rode for the local pricing, I encountered another issue. The trip seemed like it would never end. After 2 hours, when it was finally over, I was charged for 2.5 hours. Yeah, somehow an extra half hour miraculously appeared. But of course, hearing a story about his family, I gave him 1,000 pesos note and told him no change necessary. This is much better than when I tried to catch a trike for a 30-minute ride from the UN station to PNR Pasay station in Metro Manila. The trike guys wanted to charge me 2,000 pesos, which I flatly rejected. After 30 minutes of waiting, I was finally able to catch a Grab, which is like Uber, and it cost me 238 pesos. So the price went from about $40 US to $5 US. Back in El Nido, part of my camera equipment broke and I needed to get an Allen key. After searching around many shops, I finally found one that sold it. And she brought this out, and I said, I only need this one actually. But she said, sorry, you have to buy the whole thing. It's 130 pesos. So I said, fine. So she went to the back, got the set, and when she came back, she said, it's 180 pesos. And I thought, this is a little bit weird. How did the price jump 40% in 40 seconds? So I just slid 130 pesos onto the counter and took the set of keys. She obviously took the money. What I know is happening is that they see a foreigner and they know we'll pay much more than locals. I totally get why they do it. Now the thing is, I think tourist pricing and local pricing is a fair practice. Locals simply don't have the wealth that tourists have, and it's a shame to price locals out of their own communities and services. My only wish, though, would be that there was a more transparent and structured way of doing this. It's just not a great feeling when people are constantly trying to maximize the amount of money they can extract from you. So I thought, what is something that other countries do to make that tourism experience great for both the locals and the tourists? One thing that I found out was a tourism tax. Japan actually kind of has this, where anyone over 2 years old exiting the country, regardless of nationality, has to pay 1,000 yen, which is like 10 US dollars. Edinburgh has voted to enact a different form of this, where you pay an extra tourist fee per night you stay in the city. In fact, El Nido does have something similar. It's called the ETDF, or Eco-Tourism Development Fee. This is tacked on to island hopping tours and costs 200 pesos. The funds are earmarked for protecting the environment, improving tourism, and a mix of some other things. All in all, I would gladly pay more money to standardize some services and ensure fairness, whether it's consistent pricing for transportation, maintaining infrastructure, protecting the environment, and of course, making sure that locals are equally benefiting from that sweet, sweet tourism cash. But now that I think about it, I don't know how a tourism tax would result in any type of standardized pricing, so I think I should just throw that idea out the window. But what I do know is that I would have had a lot more fun in the Philippines if I wasn't constantly trying to think about, hey, is this person trying to grossly overcharge me? Because on the one hand, I feel like a bit of an idiot and a bit violated if I'm being charged a price that I don't think is fair. But on the other hand, I feel like an a-hole if I'm trying to not pay a price that I can actually afford to. So, this is the end of my series on the Philippines. A hard thing for me to reconcile was the incredible income inequality that I saw. I was so much more wealthy than the average Filipino. It honestly felt hard to relax when I knew I was enjoying a lifestyle that so many locals couldn't. In making this video series, going to the Philippines, and not talking about the parts that aren't as glamorous, I just felt like I was doing a disservice. I'd be pretending everything was great when in fact I experienced many things that I struggled to understand. My feeling is that if you really want to tell the story of a people, of a country, you need to go and experience what they do on the day-to-day. In my time there, I barely scratched the surface. However, perhaps everyone would be happier if next time I skipped the more complicated stories and simply went to the nicest spots and enjoyed my time. Again, special thanks to all the kind people that showed me around. I wrote a simple message asking for help while in the Philippines, and I got that in spades. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye. What would you do if you visited the Philippines?